Hello and welcome to this second video for the Cambridge International AS Level Thinking Skills. This is the first proper lesson that relates to the Paper 2 component, which is critical thinking. So today we are going to be looking at what is an argument and how are they created. In order to do that, we need to understand how an argument looks, so we need to identify the features of an argument and then to understand and recognise argument indicators. That hopefully should give us a position whereby we can start looking for different pieces of text and deciding whether or not they are arguments. So if you did the prep work from the first video, I asked you first and foremost to find out what the argument was that was presented in that article. That what you should be able to do from the very end of this is look back over your findings and decide whether you were correct or not, or whether what you were reading actually was an argument. Now, if you can, could you please email me if you are completing this particular course? Because we're doing this remotely and because the numbers are going to be quite small, I want to make sure that I can pass on information to do with examination questions, anything that could be relevant as well, so I can start tailoring that to specific people. So do drop me a line if you are completing this particular course. So the reason why you need to have a look at the features of an argument to work out what an argument is and how we form an argument is because everybody loves to be right. Everybody loves to have a debate, a discussion, an argument, and feel as though that they've won that. So obviously there's an intrinsic reward for being able to know this particular skill. But if we're looking at the reasons why this is so valuable, this is perhaps one of humanity's longest question. You know, logicians have been around for thousands of years, and this concept of logic underpins lots of other disciplines. So for example, if you're studying philosophy or you're thinking of studying philosophy, logic and the creation and form of an argument is something that underpins absolutely all components that you'll study. Likewise, if you're doing history, politics, geography, any of the humanities-based subjects, any subject that requires an argument, these basic premises are absolutely vital and absolutely useful for you to understand. So hopefully from this you'll be able to explore a few different ideas and concepts, but I'm going to go through things quite to a basic standard today. And what I would recommend that you do is that you have a notepad, that you take notes as you're going along this, and if you're not sure about how to take notes, there's an EPQ video, so that's EPQ video 3, which talks about different note-taking methods, and if you want to watch that, that could be useful as well. So the definition of an argument is this: that there has to be a proponent of an argument, and that's usually a person. You know, we're not to the stage of artificial intelligence yet. And what happens is that proponent sets out a number of premises. Those premises might be known as reasons. They might be sometimes known as evidence. But essentially, a premise are a number of different reasons that are used to support a conclusion. And the conclusion usually follows on from one or more of these premises. Now, if the premise is true, or if the premises are true, then that means that the conclusion must be true as well. So I'm going to try and give you some examples today that you could potentially use. And this is one that I have a very regular argument with my wife about. It's quite topical at the moment because we had this argument yesterday. So this would be an example of an argument. It's sunny outside, so we should do the washing now and put it out. Now, if we're looking at what the premise is that first part, that it's sunny outside. That's usually normally at the start of a sentence, but it doesn't always have to be. Then what we have at the very end is the conclusion. We have the conclusion that so we should do the washing now and put it out. Okay, nice and straightforward. Now, if we're creating an argument, what usually happens is that there's an argument indicator that separates the premise from the conclusion. Now, that might be the word so, therefore, ergo, thus, for this reason, but it's essentially a link between a premise and a conclusion. And usually, if we're looking for an argument, and we'll talk about how we try and find an argument later, we're looking for one of these argument indicators. Now, if we're trying to decide whether or not an argument is reasoned, we're looking for two things in that particular sentence. We're looking to see if it's valid, so if the sentence is valid, and we're looking to see if the sentence or the argument is sound. And another word for sound is cogent. So if an argument is valid in this particular case, then it would be true that sunny weather causes washing to be dry. So that's linking the premise to the conclusion. So is it true then that sunny weather causes washing to be dry? So an argument that my wife and I will have, and usually it's because I don't want to put the washing out, I'm a bit lazy like that. I'll say some things like it's the temperature and the wind strength that will mean that it will dry quickly, not how sunny it is. So today, for example, on this Tuesday, it's quite sunny, but it's quite chilly, and I don't think that will mean that the washing will dry quickly. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to question the validity of the argument there. The other thing that we could look at is we could look at whether the argument is sound. Now, if an argument is sound, then that would be that the premise is true. So I could question whether or not sunny weather causes washing to be dry, but I could also question whether or not it's sunny. It's not that sunny, it's overcast today, it's not going to be the kind of weather that we need. So an argument is reasoned if it has validity and if it has cogency or soundness. Now, you're not doing this particular course to have arguments about whether or not to put the washing out, but that was just really to indicate those key terms of validity, cogency, and argument indicators. But what we're going to try and do today is look at how we can apply that formation of an argument to perhaps some historical settings and also some modern settings as well. So imagine this is an argument from history. Illnesses usually cause sores that smell bad, and areas where there are ill people usually have bad scents. So it must be the case that bad smells, we're going to call them miasma, cause illness. Now this was an argument that was created back in ancient Rome, so we're going back 2,000 years ago, and was popular and was the widely held belief up until about 1860. Now this is an argument that if you were having a discussion or a debate about maybe 150, 200 years ago, the vast majority of people would be in agreement that this argument is valid and this argument is sound. So let's just go through what we can see here as well. We can see that at the very start we have a premise. Illnesses usually cause sores that smell bad. And we've also got a second premise. Areas where there are ill people usually have bad scents. We have our argument indicator, and our argument indicator in this particular sentence is the word so, and we have our conclusion. It must be the case that bad smells / miasma cause illness. Now, we know nowadays that isn't true, but if we're looking at the formation of an argument, this is still an argument. People perhaps could propose that particular argument even today, even though we know that it wouldn't necessarily hold cogency and validity. Now, it doesn't have to be the case that we have the premise before the conclusion. It could be that we start with the conclusion. So you can see that in this particular sentence we put bad smells, miasma, cause illness. So that's the conclusion first. Our argument indicator in this sense is the word because, and we're finishing off with the premise, which is areas where disease spread also seem to smell worse. So you don't have to have it in that specific order. Now we know now that particular argument isn't correct, and we can easily dispute it. So if we were to have a counter argument to that particular theory of miasma, we could say microscopic germs cause disease because scientists have been able to prove through the use of microscopes that certain bacteria are not found naturally on humans but are passed on through ingestion or inhalation. Now what we have here is we have microscopic germs cause disease. That is our conclusion at the very start. So our conclusion is in that first line. We have our argument indicator, which is because, and the rest of it is our premise or reasons. Now we can add other reasons. We can add picture evidence, video evidence. So for example, what you've got there is a microscopic still of the pathogens in cholera, and that all forms part of this premise. So arguments can be proposed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're factually correct. So good arguments, therefore, usually have multiple premises, and then there will be a conclusion at the end, or vice versa. So you start with the conclusion, then you have multiple premises. These premises might be known facts, they might be suggestions, opinions, forecasts, beliefs. Now, the reason why I put the word known facts there is because what we would consider to be factual now, it might change over 100, 200 years' time. So that belief in miasma was presumed to be a known fact until the germ theory that was proposed by Louis Pasteur in the 1860s comprehensively defeated that known fact and replaced it. So different premises might have, or different arguments might have different types of premises. It's really dependent on the kind of argument that you're making. So let's have a look at an argument that perhaps people are having today in 2020, and we'll try and look at what the strengths are for the two different arguments. So you might have heard about this. This is quite a popular argument that people are having at the moment. And as critical thinkers, remember, our job is to use logic to try and not necessarily focus in on our emotions. So this is an argument that some people are having. It says that the largest 5G network in the world is in China and was built in 2019. In the same year, coronavirus spread from China. Ergo, 5G causes coronavirus. Now, I've tried to do as much research as I possibly can about this 5G link to coronavirus. And from my understanding, this is the crux of the argument that is being put forward by conspiracy theorists. So what we need to consider, and I'd like you to pause after this particular question and have a bit of a think. Why might we say that this is an invalid and an uncogent argument? So why is it lacking sound? Why is it not necessarily valid as an argument? Because if we're looking at the sentence itself, it's got a premise, it's got an argument indicator, and it's got a conclusion. So it's still an argument, but why does it lack validity? Why does it lack cogency? So the counter argument that we could say to this is that, well, China creating 5G was actually done a few years ago, and not the same year as coronavirus being caused. And to make the link between coronavirus expanding in 2019 and 5G also expanding in 2019, and both things having links to China, is what we would call coincidental. So that necessarily doesn't automatically mean that the conclusion is correct. So those particular premises are coincidental and doesn't necessarily have that much of a tie-in to that particular conclusion. So a counter argument that people could give back to this is coronavirus is not caused by 5G masts. It's caused by people passing the virus through physical contact. But why might we say that this is an uncogent argument? Why might this not necessarily be a strong counter argument to that particular point? Well, in order for arguments to have real validity and real cogency, it's important that the evidence that is used is strengthened, and that might be through the use of using more than one premise. It might be using information which is part of known facts. It might be using visual cues. It might be using video clues. It might be using expert opinion, people that are researchers in that particular field. So this particular statement, or this argument, coronavirus is not spread by 5G masts. The energy levels from 5G radio waves are tiny and would not impact on your physiology. And you can see that using the electromagnetic spectrum, which has been provided by Imperial College London. We also know that viruses are passed from person to person through inhalation or ingestion, as viruses have been collected and studied in laboratories. However, it might be the case that passing this logic and creating a reasoned argument with premises that are linked to sound evidence might not be enough to convince other people that their arguments are untrue or unfounded. And that's the job of a critical thinker. A critical thinker really needs to engage in those particular arguments and reflect on them critically. And this is a problem specifically for English-speaking people, because for us, argument has two different meanings. Argument means a reason or reason supporting a conclusion, as we're talking about today, but also it means a debate or a dispute, a disagreement, a quarrel, and a row. And we know at the moment that when people are being asked to have an argument a discussion about this particular topic that it can get quite heated. And it's important, therefore, for critical thinkers to be able to recognise other people's arguments, to recognise parts of the arguments that might be necessarily true, and to use them to strengthen their own counter-arguments. And what we'll be doing in future lessons is we'll be looking at how to create a conclusion, a sound conclusion, how to use counter-arguments effectively. Remember, these are just the first basic steps. But it might be useful for you to have a look at the arguments that people have been having on both sides of this particular argument. I'm not necessarily calling it a debate or a discussion, because I don't necessarily think that that's what both sides are necessarily doing this. So have a look at the arguments that people are raising and try and understand why the argument for the fact that there is no link for 5G causing coronavirus holds more validity and more cogency. Now, what you also need to be able to do for this particular course is that you need to be able to identify an argument. So what might happen in the exam is they might give you a series of texts, or a text, just one particular piece of text, and you might be asked to identify what is the argument, or where is the argument out of these particular lists, or which ones are arguments and which ones are not. Now, this can be really difficult, and actually there isn't an exact science to this. The first thing that we can say is that there's probably going to be a grammatical clue in the particular text that will indicate whether it is an argument. So if it has something like so, or therefore, or ergo, might usually identify this as an argument, but it doesn't always. So a good example to use in the exam board's example is, if you know the Kelly Clarkson famous song, but since you've been gone, I can breathe for the first time. That particular line sounds like an argument because it has an argument indicator, which is since, but that isn't an argument. So we still have to be wary about that. What we need to do more is we need to think if the author meant a claim to be a conclusion and that the other sentences were premises for it. So if we are going to be identifying an argument, one thing that a lot of people use is something called the so therefore test. Now, what you do is, if you take the paragraph or the particular sentences that you've got, if it doesn't have an argument indicator, then try and put the word therefore in front of a statement to see if it works as a conclusion. And you can do the exact same for the word so. So insert the word so in front of other statements to check the conclusion follows from them as premises. If neither of them works, then it is not an argument. But if it does work, then it may possibly be an argument. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to do a few things as a bit of work from this particular video. So this video, a reminder, is really just giving you the basics, and what you need to be doing for this particular course is exploring it yourself. So the first thing that I want you to do is I'd like you to think about whether or not you can start constructing your own reasoned argument. So here's a topical story at the moment. It involves the US women's football team and their pay claim, their equal pay claim with the US Supreme Court. This past week, the US Supreme Court rejected the players' claims that they were underpaid compared to the men. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to read through a few articles about this, because that's the first thing that we need to do if we're creating an argument. We need to be as widely read as possible. I'd like you to clearly state your conclusion, and you should try and use argument indicators in that, so things like ergo, so, therefore. Make sure that you have premises that link to that particular conclusion. So if you believe that Megan Rapinoe and the other members of the US women's football team are correct in asking for equal pay, or if you believe that the judge has got the sounder argument, then you need to have premises that link to that particular conclusion, and decide whether you should make your conclusion stronger or less strong. That's a tough one, that final one, so it's up to you whether or not you decide to do that. Along with that, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to have a go at a few tasks that would really assess whether or not you've understood what an argument is and how they're formed. Now, the links that you've got on the screen there, I'll put them in the description of the video. The fourth one is just a fantastic sketch by the Monty Pythons, and it's called The Argument Clinic, and it gives their definition of what an argument is. It's quite apt for what we're looking at today. But the other links are from different websites and different people that are trying to get students involved in critical thinking and thinking skills to be assessed. So there's some quizzes, there's some exercises about identifying arguments. It's really important that you follow this up by testing yourself on them, because just watching a video won't be enough. Can you also, as well, as I said at the very start, please email me to state whether you are doing this particular course, and then I can start setting specific quizzes and tests that relate to the AS Cambridge Thinking Skills course. It might be useful as well to do a diary as you're going alongside this, just after each lesson, just a reminder as to what you've done. Thanks very much for listening, and hope you're doing well in lockdown.